What happens when the galaxy's most advanced civilizations dismiss humanity's greatest weapon as weakness? When silence is mistaken for stupidity, and restraint is confused with inability. Dr. Elena Vasquez sat quietly in the back of the Galactic Council chamber, enduring months of ridicule from species that had conquered stars while humans were still learning to make fire. They mocked her refusal to speak during debates, her calm demeanor during insults, her patient smile when they called humans the silent primitives. But Elena wasn't staying quiet because she couldn't contribute. She was staying quiet because once she spoke, once she showed them what human strategic thinking could really accomplish, the entire balance of galactic power would shift forever. Sometimes the most dangerous thing in the universe isn't the one making the most noise. Sometimes it's the one who's been listening, learning, and waiting for the perfect moment to ask a simple question that changes everything. Should I act like I can't win? Dr. Elena Vasquez pressed her fingers against the smooth surface of her data pad, feeling the slight vibration as another alien delegate's voice boomed through the translation matrix. The Galactic Council chamber stretched before her like a massive amphitheater, its crystalline walls catching and refracting the light from 3 different suns that illuminated the space station orbiting Nexus Prime. Representatives from 47 different species occupied the tiered seating, their various forms creating a tapestry of evolution that would have fascinated her under different circumstances. Today marked her 93rd day as humanity's representative to the Galactic Council, and it was also her 93rd day of remaining silent during formal proceedings. Not because she lacked opinions or insights, but because Elena understood something that her fellow humans back on Earth seemed to miss. In a galaxy filled with species that had been spacefaring for millennia, sometimes the smartest strategy was to listen before you spoke. The current speaker was Ambassador Thektar, a towering Vorthan whose silicon-based physiology gave him the appearance of living volcanic rock. His species had been among the first to achieve faster-than-light travel, and they never let anyone forget it. The Vorthans controlled 17 star systems and possessed military technology that could reduce planets to cosmic dust in hours. Thektar's voice rumbled through the chamber like distant thunder as he addressed the current crisis. The Zephyrian expansion into the Outer Rim territories threatens the established order, Thektar declared, his words causing several smaller species representatives to shift nervously. Their mining operations violate the galactic accords signed after the Third Rim War. We must respond with decisive military action before they claim more systems. Elena made a small notation on her data pad, her expression remaining carefully neutral. The Zephyrians were a relatively new species to achieve interstellar capability, having joined the Galactic Council only 2 centuries ago. Their rapid expansion had indeed caused concern among the established powers, but Elena had spent weeks studying the situation from every angle. The truth was far more complex than Thektar's militant posturing suggested. "The human delegate seems particularly engaged today," came a sardonic voice from the Kithran section. Ambassador Silthara, whose serpentine species possessed natural telepathic abilities, had made Elena's silence a frequent target of her commentary. "Perhaps she's composing poetry about our discussions. I hear primitives enjoy such simple activities." A ripple of what passed for laughter among various species echoed through the chamber. Elena had grown accustomed to such comments over the past 3 months. The Kitharans considered themselves the galaxy's intellectual elite, their ancient civilization having unlocked the secrets of consciousness manipulation and mental projection thousands of years before humans discovered agriculture. Silthara's scaled features formed what might have been a smile, though her species' facial expressions remained alien to most observers. Elena continued writing, her pen moving steadily across the digital surface. She was not composing poetry, though she understood why her methodical note-taking might appear mysterious to species that communicated through everything from bioluminescent displays to pheromone releases. She was instead constructing a detailed analysis of each speaker's position, their species' historical grievances, current resource needs, and likely motivations for supporting or opposing various proposals. Perhaps our silent human friend has nothing to contribute because her species lacks the cognitive development for interstellar diplomacy, suggested Ambassador Uargok of the Bruten Confederacy. The massive, bear-like creatures comment drew more amusement from the assembled delegates. Humans have been spacefaring for what, 2 centuries? My species mastered warp technology when theirs were still throwing stones at each other. Elena glanced up briefly, meeting Uargok's 6 eyes with a calm expression before returning to her notes. The Bruton ambassador wasn't entirely wrong about the timeline, though his dismissive tone revealed more about Bruton insecurity than human limitations. The Confederacy had indeed achieved faster-than-light travel millennia ago, but their expansion had stalled centuries before humanity even reached their own moon. Sometimes early success led to complacency. The debate continued for another hour, with various species presenting their positions on the Zephyrian situation. The aquatic collective suggested economic sanctions, their spokesperson's translated voice carrying an odd bubbling quality that indicated they were communicating from a water-filled environmental suit. The Crystalline Union proposed a diplomatic solution, their representative's prismatic body refracting light in patterns that served as additional layers of communication beyond spoken words. Elena recorded each position, but she also noted the subtle dynamics playing out beneath the surface of formal debate. The way the Vorthans and Kitharans exchanged glances when certain topics arose suggested prior coordination. The nervous fidgeting of smaller species delegates when military action was discussed revealed their fears about being caught between larger powers. The careful positioning of seats and the timing of various speakers indicated alliance structures that weren't immediately obvious to casual observers. As the session neared its end, Chairman Veltar of the ancient Nexari called for final comments. The Nexari were among the galaxy's oldest spacefaring species, their civilization having achieved interstellar travel when Earth's sun was still a young star. Veltar's elongated cranium and translucent skin marked him as a member of a species that had evolved beyond many physical limitations through genetic manipulation and technological integration. Before we adjourn, Veltar announced, his voice carrying the weight of millennia of galactic politics, I must address a concerning pattern in these proceedings. We have a representative among us who has chosen to remain silent for 3 months of critical debates. While the Terran Federation was granted council membership as a courtesy to their rapid technological development, participation requires more than mere presence. Elena felt the attention of the entire chamber focus on her. Dozens of alien eyes, optical sensors, and electromagnetic perception organs turned in her direction. She continued writing for a moment, finishing her current notation, before setting down her pen and looking up to meet the chairman's ancient gaze. Dr. Vasquez, Veltar continued, your species requested membership in this council, claiming you had contributions to make to galactic civilization. Yet you sit silently while we debate matters that affect billions of lives across hundreds of worlds. Some delegates have suggested that humanity lacks the intellectual capacity for meaningful participation. Others believe your silence indicates indifference to galactic affairs. I find myself curious about your perspective on these observations. The chamber felt completely silent. Even the ambient sounds of the station's life support systems seemed muted as every being present waited for Elena's response. She could feel the weight of expectation, the mixture of curiosity and condescension that had characterized her reception since arriving at Nexus Prime. Elena stood slowly, her human height making her smaller than most other delegates, but her posture conveying a confidence that had been invisible during her months of observation. She looked around the chamber, making brief eye contact with representatives from dozens of species, her gaze calm and measuring. Chairman Veltar, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the translation matrix. I appreciate your concern about my participation. You're correct that I have remained silent during formal debates, and I understand why some delegates might interpret this as disengagement or inability to contribute. She paused, letting her words settle before continuing. However, silence is not always a sign of weakness or ignorance. Sometimes it's a strategic choice made by those who understand the value of observation before action. Silthara's scales shifted color in what Elena had learned was a sign of amusement among Kitharans. Strategic choice? The telepath scoffed. Or perhaps an attempt to mask intellectual limitations behind mysterious behavior? Elena turned toward the Kitharan delegate, her expression remaining pleasant. Ambassador Silthara, Your species' telepathic abilities are indeed remarkable. However, I've noticed that you often mistake confidence for correctness and volume for wisdom. These are common errors among those who have grown accustomed to reading surface thoughts rather than analyzing deeper patterns. The comment drew a surprised murmur from several delegates. Few species dared to directly challenge Kitharan intellectual superiority, particularly not newcomers to the galactic community. Deeper patterns? Thektar rumbled from his position among the Vorthan delegation. What patterns could a species barely 2 centuries removed from their homeworld possibly perceive that escape civilizations with millennia of experience? Elena smiled, and something in that expression made several delegates suddenly pay closer attention. It wasn't the polite, diplomatic smile they had grown accustomed to seeing from her. It carried an edge that suggested hidden depths. Ambassador Thektar, you've spent the last 3 months advocating for military action against the Zephyrians, describing their expansion as a threat to galactic stability. You've presented their mining operations as violations of the Galactic Accords and their territorial claims as aggressive expansionism. Elena's voice remained calm, but her words carried a precision that cut through the chamber's background noise. Those are facts, not interpretations, Thektar replied, though something in his tone suggested uncertainty. Are they? Elena asked, reaching for her datapad. Because according to my analysis of the situation, the Zephyrian expansion follows patterns established by the Vorthan Empire during your own territorial acquisitions in the Inner Rim systems. Their mining operations utilize the same legal frameworks your species employed to claim the mineral-rich worlds of the Kethra system. Their territorial expansion rate is actually slower than the average established by current council members during their own growth periods. The chamber stirred as delegates began accessing their own data systems, cross-referencing Elena's claims. The human had been silent for months, but, apparently, she had not been idle. Furthermore, Elena continued, the real threat to galactic stability isn't Zephyrian expansion. It's the resource depletion crisis that none of you want to acknowledge publicly. The Vorthans need new mineral sources because your industrial worlds are exhausting their primary deposits. The Kitharans require rare, crystalline formations for their consciousness manipulation technology, and the Outer Rim territories contain the galaxy's largest undeveloped deposits. The Aquatic Collective needs new water worlds because their population growth has exceeded their current system capacity. Elena's words fell into a silence that felt different from before. This wasn't the expectant quiet of beings waiting for entertainment. This was the tense stillness that preceded storms. You're all positioning yourselves for resource conflicts, she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. The Zephyrian expansion is simply the trigger you've been waiting for to justify military action that would give you access to territories you've already decided you need. The question isn't whether the Zephyrians are violating galactic law. The question is whether you're going to start a war over resources while pretending it's about principles. Chairman Veltar leaned forward in his seat, his ancient features showing the first genuine interest Elena had seen from him. Dr. Vasquez, these are serious accusations. Do you have evidence to support these claims? Elena touched her datapad, and the chamber's central display activated, showing a complex three-dimensional map of the galaxy with overlaid data streams. Resource depletion rates, population growth curves, territorial expansion patterns, and trade route analyses appeared in multiple colors and formats designed to be readable by species with different visual capabilities. 3 months of silence, Elena said, gesturing toward the display, allowed me to compile comprehensive data on every species represented in this council. Resource consumption rates, population pressures, territorial needs, historical expansion patterns, military capabilities, alliance structures, and economic dependencies. While you've been debating the symptoms of galactic tension, I've been analyzing the underlying causes. The display shifted, showing probability matrices and conflict prediction algorithms. Several delegates gasped or made their species equivalent sounds of surprise as they recognized the sophistication of the analysis. According to this data, Elena continued, the current trajectory leads to a multi-system conflict within 5 years, regardless of what happens with the Zephyrians. Your resource needs are growing exponentially, while available territories are diminishing. Mathematical inevitability suggests that war is approaching whether you start it now over Zephyrian expansion or later over something else. Uargok of the Brutan Confederacy stood abruptly, his massive frame towering over most other delegates. You presume to lecture civilizations older than your species with mathematical projections? War is not a mathematical equation, child. It's about strength, will, and survival. Elena met the Bruthan's challenging gaze without flinching. Ambassador Uargok, your species has survived longer than most others in this galaxy, but survival and prosperity are different things. The Brutan Confederacy hasn't expanded its territory in 4 centuries despite having one of the galaxy's most powerful military forces. You've survived, but you haven't grown. Mathematical projections suggest this is because you've confused aggression with strategy, strength with wisdom. The comment struck deep, and Elena could see it in the way Uargok's fur bristled and his claws extended slightly. The Brutan Confederacy's stagnation was a sensitive topic among their leadership. However, Elena continued before Uargok could respond. I didn't break my silence to insult anyone's strategic capabilities or to demonstrate human analytical skills. I spoke because silence has served its purpose. I've learned everything I need to know about this council, its members, and the challenges facing galactic civilization. She paused, letting the tension build before asking the question that would change everything. The real question now is whether you want to continue pretending that this council exists to maintain peace and stability, or whether you're ready to acknowledge that it's actually a forum for managing the transition to inevitable conflict. Because I have solutions to offer, but they require abandoning several comfortable illusions about galactic politics. The chamber erupted into a cacophony of voices, translation matrices struggling to keep up with the sudden outpouring of responses in dozens of languages and communication methods. Some delegates demanded elaboration, others accused Elena of manipulation, and several species representatives began heated discussions among themselves. Chairman Veltar raised his hand for silence, and the chamber gradually quieted. His ancient eyes fixed on Elena with an intensity that suggested she had finally captured the full attention of one of the galaxy's oldest political minds. Dr. Vasquez, he said slowly, you have made remarkable claims and demonstrated impressive analytical capabilities. However, you have also challenged fundamental assumptions about galactic governance and suggested that this council has been operating under false pretenses. These are not accusations to be made lightly. Elena nodded respectfully. Chairman Veltar, I understand the gravity of what I'm suggesting. But continuing to operate under false pretenses won't make the underlying problems disappear. Resource depletion, population pressure, and territorial competition are mathematical realities, not political opinions. The question is whether we address these challenges through coordination and innovation, or whether we allow them to drive us into conflicts that could devastate galactic civilization. And you believe humanity has solutions to problems that have challenged galactic civilization for millennia? Silthara asked, her telepathic abilities apparently having detected something in Elena's mental patterns that intrigued rather than amused her. Elena's smile returned, but this time it carried a confidence that made even the most ancient delegates pay attention. Ambassador Silthara, humanity may be young compared to other galactic civilizations, but youth sometimes brings advantages that age overlooks. We haven't had millennia to develop rigid thinking patterns or become invested in systems that no longer serve their original purposes. She gestured toward the data display, which continued showing the complex analysis of galactic resource and territorial patterns. More importantly, humans have a particular talent for finding unconventional solutions to seemingly impossible problems. We call it innovation born from necessity. When you're the youngest species in a galaxy full of established powers, you either find new ways to contribute value or you become irrelevant. The session ended shortly afterward, but Elena knew that her months of silence had accomplished exactly what she intended. She had observed, learned, and positioned herself to speak at the moment when her words would carry maximum impact. As delegates filed out of the chamber, many paused to look at her with new interest, and several approached to request private discussions. As Elena gathered her materials, She reflected on the irony that her greatest weapon in galactic politics had been the very thing that others mistook for weakness, the willingness to wait, watch, and choose her moment carefully. Humanity's entry into galactic civilization would be different from any other species' introduction, not because humans were stronger or more advanced, but because they understood the power of strategic patience combined with analytical thinking. The real game was just beginning, and Elena was finally ready to play. The private meeting chamber aboard Nexus Prime Station hummed with the subtle energy signatures of 6 different environmental systems, each tailored to support the physiology of species that had never evolved under the same star. Elena arrived precisely on time, her data pad loaded with information that would either revolutionize galactic civilization or destroy her species, standing in the Council forever. Chairman Veltar had requested this gathering within hours of the previous day's session, inviting only the most influential delegates to hear Elena's proposed solutions to what she had termed the resource inevitability crisis. The assembled beings represented more combined political power than most star systems would ever encounter, and Elena was acutely aware that her next words could determine humanity's future in the galaxy. Ambassador Thektar dominated one corner of the chamber, his volcanic features radiating heat that caused the room's atmospheric processors to work overtime. Despite his species' militaristic reputation, Elena had noticed something in his reaction to her data presentation that suggested deeper intelligence than his aggressive posturing typically revealed. The Vorthans hadn't conquered 17-star systems through brute force alone. Silthara coiled in her specialized seating area, the Kitharin's serpentine form allowing her to remain comfortable in multiple positions while her telepathic abilities continuously monitored the emotional undertones of the gathering. Elena had learned to maintain disciplined thoughts around telepaths, but she suspected Silthara was more interested in observing the group dynamics than invading individual minds. The Aquatic Collective had sent Ambassador Tidalquin, whose environmental suit gave him the appearance of a walking ocean. The advanced technology required to maintain his aquatic environment in the vacuum of space represented centuries of engineering evolution, and Elena respected the dedication required for his species to participate in galactic politics despite their physiological limitations. Representing the crystalline union, Prismark's geometric form refracted light in patterns that served as both communication and emotional expression. The living crystal being's responses were among the most difficult for humans to interpret, but Elena had spent considerable time learning to read the subtle frequency variations that indicated agreement, disagreement, or curiosity. Uargok of the Brutan Confederacy had initially declined the invitation, but Chairman Veltar's personal request had apparently overridden the massive creature's pride. The bear-like alien occupied the chamber's largest chair, his 6 eyes fixed on Elena with an expression that balanced skepticism with grudging interest. Dr. Vasquez, Chairman Veltar, began once everyone was settled. Yesterday you claimed that this council has been operating under false pretenses and that humanity possesses solutions to challenges that have troubled galactic civilization for millennia. You also suggested that current resource competition patterns make large-scale conflict mathematically inevitable. These are extraordinary claims that require extraordinary evidence. Elena activated her data pad, and the chamber's central display came alive with 3-dimensional models that represented decades of analysis compressed into visual form. The complexity of the information would have overwhelmed most human minds, but she had learned that galactic-level thinking required processing capabilities that stretched cognitive limits. Chairman Veltar, the evidence exists in patterns that become visible only when analyzed across sufficient time scales and data points. Elena began, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who had spent months preparing for this moment. Human civilization developed under unique circumstances that shaped our analytical approaches differently from species that achieved spaceflight through gradual technological progression. She gestured toward the display, which showed a timeline of human development compared to other galactic civilizations. Most species followed predictable patterns: slow technological advancement, gradual expansion to nearby star systems, establishment of trade networks, and eventual integration into galactic civilization. This process typically took millennia, and resulted in stable but ultimately limited growth curves. Limited growth. Thektar rumbled, his volcanic features showing signs of irritation. The Vorthan Empire controls 17 star systems and possesses the military capability to defend against any threat in this galaxy. How is this limited? Elena's smile carried no condescension, only the patience of someone explaining a concept that required careful consideration. Ambassador Thektar, your empire is indeed impressive by current galactic standards. However, your expansion rate has declined by 73% over the past millennium. Your resource acquisition efficiency has dropped by 42% during the same period. Your military spending as a percentage of total economic output has increased by 28%, while your actual military capability improvements have plateaued. The display shifted to show detailed analysis of Vorthan economic and military data, information that should have been classified but which Elena had somehow compiled through careful observation and analysis. These patterns are not unique to the Vorthan Empire, Elena continued, noting the surprised expressions around the chamber. Every major galactic power shows similar decline, curves masked by absolute numbers that continue growing slowly. You're all following the same trajectory toward stagnation, and you're all approaching resource limits that will force difficult choices within decades. Silthara's scales shifted through colors that Elena had learned indicated deep thought among Kitharans. Dr. Vasquez, your analysis is impressively detailed, but decline is not inevitable. Civilizations adapt, evolve, and find new solutions to emerging challenges. We have done so for millennia. Have you? Elena asked, her tone remaining respectful but challenging. Or have you been managing decline so effectively that you've mistaken stagnation for stability? Consider the Kitharan Dominion's expansion history. Your territory reached its maximum extent 1,800 years ago. Since then, you've maintained existing holdings while technological advancement has slowed dramatically. Your consciousness manipulation technology hasn't seen major breakthroughs in 6 centuries. The chamber fell silent as delegates accessed their own historical databases, cross-referencing Elena's claims against official records. The human's analysis was proving disturbingly accurate. Furthermore, Elena continued, each major galactic power has developed specialization patterns that create interdependencies while limiting innovation. The Vorthans focus on military technology and territorial control. The Kitharans concentrate on mental sciences and intellectual pursuits. The aquatic collective excels at environmental adaptation and resource management. The Crystalline Union masters energy manipulation and computational systems. The display showed interconnected webs of trade, technology exchange, and resource dependencies that linked every major galactic civilization in complex patterns of mutual reliance. These specializations created stability and prevented major conflicts through mutual dependency, Elena explained. But they also created systemic limitations. Each species developed deep expertise in narrow areas while allowing other capabilities to atrophy. Innovation slowed because breakthrough thinking requires integrating concepts from multiple disciplines. Prismark's crystalline form shifted through frequency patterns that translated as curiosity tinged with concern. You suggest that specialization, which has maintained galactic peace for millennia, is actually a source of weakness? Elena nodded. Not weakness exactly, but limitation. Specialization works efficiently until circumstances change beyond its parameters. The resource crisis approaching galactic civilization represents exactly that kind of paradigm shift. Current systems and approaches are insufficient for addressing exponentially growing needs within finite territorial boundaries. Chairman Veltar leaned forward, his ancient features showing intense interest. Dr. Vasquez, you've identified problems that we acknowledge exist, though perhaps not to the extent your analysis suggests. However, identifying problems is considerably easier than solving them. You claimed yesterday that humanity has solutions. What exactly are you proposing? Elena had been waiting for this question through months of careful observation and analysis. Everything she had learned about galactic civilization had led to this moment, when she would either prove humanity's value to the galaxy or reveal the limitations that others suspected. The solution begins with understanding why human development followed a different pattern from other galactic civilizations, Elena said, changing the display to show Earth's unique technological progression. Most species achieved spaceflight through gradual advancement over thousands of years. Humans went from atmospheric flight to interstellar travel in less than 2 centuries. Rapid advancement born from warfare and competition, Uargok growled dismissively. Primitive aggression channeled into technological development. This is not innovation, it's desperation. Elena turned toward the massive Brutan delegate. Ambassador Uargok, you're partially correct, but you're missing the crucial factor that made human development unique. Yes, competition and conflict drove rapid advancement, but the key difference was integration rather than specialization. The display showed human technological development trees, demonstrating how advances in one field consistently influence breakthroughs in seemingly unrelated areas. Human civilization never had the luxury of deep specialization because our species faced existential threats that required integrated solutions. Military technology advancement demanded materials science breakthroughs, which required chemistry innovations, which needed mathematical development, which drove computational advancement. Integration thinking, Elena continued, means approaching problems from multiple disciplines simultaneously rather than seeking specialized solutions within narrow expertise areas. When humans developed faster-than-light travel, we didn't just solve the physics challenges. We simultaneously addressed navigation problems, life support systems, communication issues, resource management, psychological factors, and dozens of other interconnected requirements. Tidal Kuhn's aquatic environment bubbled as he processed this information. Dr. Vasquez, you describe problem-solving methodology, not solutions to resource scarcity. How does integrated thinking address the mathematical reality of exponentially growing needs within finite territorial boundaries? Elena's smile broadened, and something in her expression made several delegates suddenly realize that the previous discussion had been preliminary context for what she was about to propose. Ambassador Tidal Kuhn, you've identified the core assumption that limits current galactic thinking, finite territorial boundaries. Every species in this galaxy has accepted that growth requires claiming new territories from someone else, which inevitably leads to conflict. But what if territorial expansion isn't the only solution to resource limitations? The chamber's atmosphere shifted as delegates began to understand that Elena was approaching the resource crisis from an entirely different conceptual framework. Human development was constrained by limited territory for thousands of years, Elena explained. We learned to increase resource availability through efficiency improvements, recycling innovations, alternative resource development, and productivity multiplication. When population pressure exceeded agricultural capacity, we developed more efficient farming methods. When mineral resources became scarce, we learned to recycle materials and find substitutes. When energy needs outpaced available sources, we discovered new energy generation techniques. But your species eventually required territorial expansion to achieve galactic capability, Silthrow pointed out. Human colonies now exist in multiple star systems. Elena nodded. True, but human expansion followed resource optimization, not resource depletion. We developed the capability to support larger populations and more advanced technology within existing territories before expanding to new ones. This created exponential growth curves rather than linear expansion patterns. The display shifted to show mathematical models that demonstrated the difference between expansion-based growth and efficiency-based growth over extended time periods. The projections were startling in their implications. Current galactic civilization follows expansion-based growth patterns, Elena explained. When resources become scarce, claim new territories. When populations exceed capacity, establish new colonies. When conflicts arise over resources, use military force to secure access. This approach works until available territories become limited, which is exactly what's happening now. Chairman Veltar studied the projections with the attention of someone who had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations across millennia. Dr. Vasquez, you're suggesting that galactic civilization has been following unsustainable development patterns for thousands of years, and that humanity learned sustainable alternatives through necessity. More than that, Elena replied, I'm suggesting that the current resource crisis represents an evolutionary pressure that could drive galactic civilization to its next development stage, if we're willing to abandon assumptions about how growth and prosperity must function. She activated a new section of data that showed potential development trajectories for galactic civilization under different scenarios. Efficiency-based growth creates exponential improvement curves that eventually exceed what's possible through territorial expansion. Resource recycling and alternative development can support populations and technology levels that would require hundreds of new star systems under current expansion models. Integration thinking applies this approach to every aspect of civilization simultaneously, Elena continued. Instead of each species specializing in narrow areas, collaborative integration allows combined capabilities that exceed what's achievable through specialization. Vorthan military technology enhanced by Kithran mental sciences and crystalline union computational power could create defensive capabilities that make territorial conflicts unnecessary. Aquatic collective environmental management combined with human efficiency optimization could support population levels that require no new colonies. The implications of Elena's proposal began settling into the minds of beings who had spent millennia thinking about galactic politics in terms of territorial competition and resource scarcity. You're describing fundamental transformation of galactic civilization, Prismark observed, the crystalline being's frequency patterns indicating deep consideration. Integration rather than specialization. Efficiency optimization rather than territorial expansion. Collaborative development rather than competitive acquisition. Elena nodded. Transformation that becomes possible when approached through integration thinking rather than specialized problem solving. Human experience suggests that civilizations facing existential resource constraints can either fight over diminishing resources or innovate beyond the constraints entirely. And if we choose innovation? Chairman Veltar asked quietly. Elena's expression showed confidence that came from months of careful analysis and preparation. If we choose innovation, galactic civilization enters a development phase that makes current power structures and resource limitations obsolete. Population growth becomes sustainable through efficiency improvements. Technology advancement accelerates through collaborative integration. Resource scarcity becomes manageable through recycling and alternative development. And if we choose conflict? Thektar rumbled. Elena's smile disappeared, replaced by the serious expression of someone who had calculated probabilities that no one wanted to acknowledge. If we choose conflict, she said quietly, mathematical projections suggest that galactic civilization destroys itself within 2 centuries through resource wars that escalate beyond any civilization's ability to control or survive. The chamber fell into a silence that felt different from any previous pause in their discussions. This wasn't the quiet of beings waiting for more information. This was the stillness that preceded decisions that would determine the fate of civilizations. Chairman Veltar finally spoke, his ancient voice carrying the weight of millennia of political experience. Dr. Vasquez, you've presented analysis and proposals that challenge fundamental assumptions about galactic civilization. However, transformation of this magnitude would require cooperation between species that have competed for resources and territory for thousands of years. What makes you believe such cooperation is possible? Elena reactivated her data pad, bringing up the final component of her presentation. Chairman Veltar, cooperation becomes possible when the alternatives are extinction. But, more importantly, cooperation becomes inevitable when the benefits of integration exceed the costs of competition. The display showed detailed economic and technological projections comparing competitive versus collaborative development models across multiple timescales and scenarios. Mathematical analysis suggests that collaborative integration could increase every major galactic power's technological capabilities, resource access, and population support capacity by factors of 10 to 100 within centuries rather than millennia. The question isn't whether cooperation is possible. The question is whether galactic civilization is ready to evolve beyond patterns that served survival needs, but now limit prosperity potential. As the meeting concluded, Elena knew that she had planted seeds of possibility in minds that had the power to transform galactic civilization. Whether those seeds would grow into revolutionary change or wither under the weight of traditional thinking remained to be determined. But, for the first time since arriving at Nexus Prime, Elena felt that humanity had demonstrated not just analytical capability, but genuine value to galactic civilization. The silence was finally broken, and the real conversation was about to begin. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened exactly 72 hours after Elena's private presentation to the major power representatives. What should have been routine proceedings to address the continuing Zephyrian expansion had transformed into something unprecedented in Council history, a formal challenge to the fundamental assumptions underlying galactic civilization. Elena stood at the central podium of the Council chamber, surrounded by delegates whose species had shaped interstellar politics for millennia. The translation matrix hummed with increased activity as representatives from 47 different civilizations accessed databases, consulted with their governments, and prepared responses to proposals that challenged everything they thought they understood about resource management and territorial development. Chairman Veltar called for order, his ancient voice carrying across the chamber with authority earned through countless sessions addressing galactic crises. The emergency session will address proposals submitted by the Terran Federation representative regarding alternative approaches to resource scarcity and territorial competition. Dr. Vasquez, the Council recognizes your request to demonstrate practical applications of integration methodology. Elena activated the chamber's central display system, which immediately began showing real-time data streams from locations throughout the galaxy. The information appeared in formats designed to be readable by dozens of different visual and sensory capabilities, representing a level of integration thinking that most delegates hadn't expected from the newest council member. Honorable delegates, Elena began, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. 3 days ago, I presented mathematical projections suggesting that galactic civilization faces inevitable resource conflicts unless fundamental approaches to growth and development change. Today, I want to demonstrate that integration methodology doesn't just solve theoretical problems. It produces measurable results in real-world applications. The display focused on a star system located in the disputed Outer Rim territories, where Zephyrian expansion had created the crisis currently dividing Council opinion. Instead of showing military positions or resource extraction operations, the visualization revealed something entirely unexpected, a collaborative development project that had been operating in secret for 6 months. The Kepler 442 system represents the first practical test of integration methodology applied to resource development and territorial management, Elena explained as the display showed detailed information about mining operations, environmental management, and population centers that shouldn't have existed according to official galactic records. Ambassador Thektar erupted from his seat, volcanic features radiating heat that caused nearby environmental systems to activate emergency cooling protocols. Dr. Vasquez, the Kepler 442 system lies within territory claimed by the Zephyrian expansion zone. No unauthorized development should be possible in that region without council knowledge and approval. Elena met the Vorthan diplomat's challenging gaze without flinching. Ambassador Thektar, you're correct that Kepler 442 lies within Zephyrian territorial claims. However, the development project operating there involves not just Zephyrian participation, but collaborative integration between 6 different galactic powers working together under human coordination. The chamber erupted into cacophonous debate as delegates demanded explanations while simultaneously accessing intelligence networks to verify Elena's claims. The political implications of secret collaborative development in disputed territory could destabilize existing alliance structures and territorial agreements throughout the galaxy. Chairman Veltar raised his hand for silence, though his expression suggested profound concern about revelations that could reshape galactic politics. Dr. Vasquez, you appear to be describing clandestine operations that violate Council protocols regarding territorial development and interspecies cooperation agreements. These are serious matters with significant legal and political ramifications. Elena nodded respectfully. Chairman Veltar, I understand the gravity of operating outside established protocols. However, the Kepler 442 project was designed specifically to demonstrate that integration methodology requires approaches that current legal and political frameworks cannot accommodate. Sometimes innovation demands accepting calculated risks. She gestured toward the display, which now showed detailed production figures, environmental impact assessments, and population statistics from the secret development project. The mathematical results speak for themselves. 6 months of collaborative integration in Kepler 442 has produced resource extraction efficiency rates that exceed typical single-species operations by factors of 3 to 7, depending on the specific resources involved. Silthara's serpentine form coiled tighter in her seating area, scales shifting through colors that indicated intense mental activity as her telepathic abilities detected undercurrents of emotion throughout the chamber. Dr. Vasquez, efficiency improvements are impressive, but unauthorized territorial development represents violation of sovereignty principles that have maintained galactic peace for millennia. What gives humanity the right to organize secret operations in disputed space? Elena's expression remained calm, though something in her eyes suggested she had been prepared for exactly this challenge. Ambassador Silthara, sovereignty principles based on territorial exclusivity become problematic when resource scarcity makes territorial competition inevitable. The question isn't what gives humanity the right to propose alternatives. The question is what gives any species the right to maintain systems that lead mathematically to civilization-destroying conflicts. The response struck at the heart of galactic political philosophy, challenging assumptions that had shaped interstellar law for thousands of years. Several delegates began urgent consultations with their governmental representatives, while others demanded detailed information about the unauthorized development project. Furthermore, Elena continued, the Kepler 442 project operated with full voluntary participation from every involved species. The Zephyrians weren't excluded from decision-making about their claimed territory. They were invited to participate in collaborative development that benefits everyone involved rather than defending claims against competing interests. Ambassador Zephy of the Zephyrian Commonwealth stood from the section traditionally allocated to newer council members, his crystalline exoskeleton refracting light in patterns that indicated both nervousness and determination. The relatively young species had joined galactic civilization only centuries ago, making them unusual allies for humanity in challenging established political structures. Honorable Chairman, Zephy began, his translated voice carrying harmonics that revealed his species' insect-like evolutionary origins. The Zephyrian Commonwealth confirms participation in the Kepler 442 development project. We accepted Dr. Vasquez's integration proposal because mathematical analysis indicated collaborative development would produce better outcomes than territorial competition. The admission sent shockwaves through the chamber as delegates realized that the newest council members had been conducting unauthorized experiments in alternative political and economic structures. The implications for existing power balances and alliance systems were staggering. Gok of the Bruten Confederacy stood slowly, his massive frame towering over most other delegates while his 6 eyes fixed on Elena with an expression that balanced respect with concern. Dr. Vasquez, the Bruten Confederacy was not invited to participate in this secret project. Was our species considered unsuitable for integration methodology? Elena turned toward the imposing Bruten representative, her expression showing no sign of intimidation despite the obvious physical threat he represented. Ambassador Gok, every major galactic power was invited to participate in Kepler 442. The Bruten Confederacy declined initial overtures because integration methodology was presented as theoretical possibility rather than proven capability. Your species chose to wait for demonstrated results before committing resources to experimental approaches. The revelation that established powers had been approached and had chosen not to participate added new complexity to an already volatile situation. The chamber buzzed with urgent communications as delegates sought instructions from their governments regarding responses to developments that no one had anticipated. However, Elena continued, Bruten observation teams have been monitoring Kepler 442 development for 3 months with our full knowledge and cooperation. Your species' military and engineering specialists have access to complete data regarding integration methodology applications and results. The question now is whether the Confederacy wishes to continue observation or begin active participation. Uargok's expression showed surprise that his species' covert monitoring had been detected and accommodated rather than resented. The implication that humans had been aware of Brutan intelligence operations while allowing them to continue suggested confidence levels that made several delegates reconsider their assessments of human strategic capabilities. Chairman Veltar accessed his personal data systems, cross-referencing Elena's claims against intelligence reports and official diplomatic communications. The complexity of coordinating secret collaborative development while maintaining diplomatic relationships with non-participating powers suggested organizational capabilities that exceeded what most civilizations expected from newcomers to galactic politics. Dr. Vasquez, Chairman Veltar said slowly, "You appear to have coordinated experimental integration between multiple galactic powers while simultaneously managing diplomatic relationships with non-participating civilizations. These activities represent unprecedented complexity in interstellar relations. How did humanity acquire the experience necessary for such sophisticated operations?" Elena smiled, and delegates who had observed her carefully over the previous months recognized the expression that preceded her most significant revelations. Chairman Veltar, humanity didn't acquire this experience. We developed it specifically for galactic application through careful analysis of existing political and economic structures. The display shifted to show organizational charts and communication networks that revealed the full scope of human preparation for galactic civilization integration. The level of detail and sophistication made it clear that humanity had been planning strategic approaches to galactic politics from the moment they achieved interstellar capability. Human entry into galactic civilization was never intended to follow traditional patterns of gradual integration and specialized development, Elena explained. We analyzed existing galactic structures, identified systemic limitations and vulnerabilities, and developed alternative approaches designed to add value rather than compete for existing resources. The Kepler 442 project represents the first practical demonstration of what becomes possible when species abandon competitive territorial acquisition in favor of collaborative resource optimization, she continued. But it's not the only integration project currently operating. The display expanded to show 3 additional star systems where similar collaborative development projects had been established with different combinations of participating species. The scope of human coordination efforts exceeded what anyone in the chamber had suspected. Integration methodology has been tested in 4 different environments with varying resource types, territorial challenges, and species combinations, Elena announced. Mathematical analysis indicates consistent results. Collaborative development produces resource extraction efficiency, environmental sustainability, and population support capability that exceeds competitive approaches by measurable factors. Ambassador Tidal Kuan of the Aquatic Collective activated his environmental suit's communication systems, the bubbling quality of his translated voice indicating intense interest. Dr. Vasquez, the Aquatic Collective participated in the Kepler 186 project, which focused on water world development and atmospheric management. Our experience confirms efficiency improvements beyond what traditional territorial expansion could achieve. Another confirmation from a participating species further validated Elena's claims while demonstrating the breadth of human coordination efforts. The chamber's political dynamics shifted as delegates realized that multiple collaborative projects had been operating successfully while the council debated theoretical resource management approaches. However, Tidal Kuan continued. Collaborative development requires trust levels between species that don't traditionally exist in galactic politics. Competition for resources has shaped interstellar relations for millennia. What makes you believe that large-scale integration is psychologically and politically possible? Elena had been waiting for this question throughout months of careful observation and analysis. The psychological and political barriers to integration represented the most significant challenges to implementing alternative approaches to galactic civilization management. Ambassador Tidal Kuan, You've identified the core limitation that prevents galactic civilization from evolving beyond current resource scarcity patterns, Elena replied. Trust requirements for collaboration do exceed what's typically available between competing species. However, trust becomes achievable when the benefits of cooperation clearly exceed the risks of competition. The display showed economic and technological projections comparing competitive versus collaborative outcomes across multiple timescales and scenarios. The mathematical advantages of integration were undeniable, but Elena knew that logical analysis alone wouldn't overcome millennia of competitive conditioning. More importantly, she continued, psychological barriers to trust diminish when collaborative frameworks include safeguards that protect each species' core interests while enabling shared benefits. Integration methodology doesn't require abandoning species-specific priorities. It requires finding approaches that allow multiple species to achieve their individual goals through cooperative action. The Kepler 442 project demonstrates practical application of protected collaboration, Elena explained as the display showed detailed organizational structures that balanced individual species' autonomy with collaborative decision-making. Each participating civilization maintains control over aspects critical to their survival and prosperity while contributing specialized capabilities to shared objectives. Prism arc of the crystalline union shifted through frequency patterns that translated as deep consideration mixed with cautious optimism. Dr. Vasquez, protected collaboration addresses trust concerns, but it doesn't eliminate competitive instincts that have driven galactic politics for millennia. What prevents participating species from abandoning cooperation when immediate advantages become available through competitive action? Elena nodded respectfully toward the crystalline being. Ambassador Prismark, competitive instincts don't disappear, but they become redirected toward more productive objectives when integration creates advantages that exceed what's achievable through traditional competition. The display showed game theory models and behavioral psychology analyses that explained how collaborative frameworks could channel competitive drives toward innovation and efficiency rather than territorial acquisition and resource hoarding. Human experience suggests that competition becomes constructive rather than destructive when focused on achieving excellence rather than defeating others, Elena explained. Integration methodology channels competitive energy toward technological advancement, efficiency improvement, and creative problem-solving rather than military confrontation and territorial expansion. Furthermore, she continued, species that experience the benefits of integration find competitive action less attractive because collaborative results exceed what any individual civilization can achieve through independent action. Mathematical reality eventually overrides psychological conditioning when the advantages become sufficiently clear. Chairman Veltar studied the projections and analyses with the attention of someone who had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations throughout galactic history. Dr. Vasquez, you've presented compelling evidence that integration methodology can produce measurable improvements in resource development and territorial management. However, transformation of galactic civilization would require implementation on scales vastly larger than experimental projects in remote star systems. Elena's expression showed confidence that came from months of careful preparation and analysis. Chairman Veltar, large-scale implementation becomes achievable when experimental projects demonstrate sufficient success to motivate widespread adoption. The question isn't whether galactic civilization can change. The question is whether it will choose to change voluntarily or wait for resource conflicts to force transformation through crisis. And if the Council chooses voluntary transformation, asked Chairman Veltar. Elena smiled with genuine optimism that had been invisible during her months of silent observation. If the Council chooses transformation, integration methodology can be scaled to encompass galactic civilization within decades rather than centuries. Resource scarcity becomes manageable, territorial conflicts become unnecessary, and technological advancement accelerates beyond current projections. And if the Council chooses to maintain existing approaches, pressed the ancient chairman. Elena's smile faded, replaced by the serious expression of someone who had calculated possibilities that no civilization wanted to face. If the Council chooses existing approaches, mathematical projections remain unchanged. Resource conflicts become inevitable within years rather than decades, and galactic civilization enters a destruction spiral that no individual species can survive or control. The chamber fell into silence that felt heavier than any previous pause in their discussions. Elena had demonstrated that integration methodology produced measurable results, that collaborative development was practically achievable, and that the choice between evolution and destruction was immediate rather than theoretical. The real question now was whether galactic civilization was ready to choose its future consciously, or whether it would allow mathematical inevitability to choose for them. Chairman Veltar looked around the chamber at delegates representing civilizations that had shaped galactic politics for millennia, then returned his ancient gaze to the human who had spent months in silence before revealing possibilities that could transform everything. The Council will recess for consultation with respective governments, he announced formally. When we reconvene, delegates will be prepared to address fundamental questions about the future of galactic civilization. As delegates filed out of the chamber, Elena remained at the podium, reviewing data that showed integration projects continuing their successful operations throughout the galaxy. She had demonstrated that change was possible. Now she would discover whether it was achievable. The assassination attempt came at 0347 station time, exactly 18 hours before the reconvened council session that would determine galactic civilization's response to integration methodology. Elena woke to her quarters' security systems activating emergency protocols as molecular disruptors attempted to breach the reinforced walls designed to withstand everything from explosive decompression to directed energy weapons. She rolled from her sleeping area into the protected alcove that served as her emergency command center, accessing communication systems that connected her directly to human intelligence networks throughout the galaxy. The attack wasn't unexpected. Elena had calculated the probability of violent resistance to integration proposals at 73% once established powers realized the implications for existing authority structures. Dr. Vasquez, this is Captain Torres of the Terran defense ship Resolute, came a voice through her secure communication system. We're detecting coordinated assault teams targeting your quarters and critical council infrastructure. Multiple species appear to be involved. Recommend immediate evacuation to secured positions. Elena's fingers moved across her emergency data pad as she accessed real-time intelligence feeds showing the scope of the attack. This wasn't a single assassination attempt by extremist groups. This was a coordinated effort by powerful factions within multiple galactic civilizations who had concluded that preventing integration implementation required eliminating its primary advocate. Captain Torres, negative on evacuation, Elena replied, her voice steady despite explosive sounds echoing through the station's corridors. Integration methodology depends on demonstrating that collaborative approaches can withstand opposition from competitive interests. Running from this challenge would undermine everything we've worked to establish. She activated defensive systems that had been installed in her quarters through careful coordination with station security, but which incorporated human technology innovations that most galactic civilizations hadn't encountered. The molecular disruptors striking her walls encountered adaptive barriers that analyzed attack patterns and adjusted defensive responses in real time. Through her quarters observation systems, Elena watched as assault teams representing at least 4 different species attempted coordinated attacks on council facilities. The sophistication of their coordination suggested planning that had begun immediately after her integration demonstrations, involving intelligence sharing and tactical cooperation between civilizations that typically competed rather than collaborated. Ironically, Elena murmured to herself while analyzing attack patterns through her data systems. They're demonstrating integration methodology while trying to prevent its implementation. Her communication system activated with an incoming message from Chairman Veltar, whose ancient voice carried urgency that suggested the attacks had achieved broader scope than Elena initially realized. Dr. Vasquez, are you secure? The station is experiencing coordinated assaults on multiple critical systems. Some faction elements are attempting to prevent tomorrow's council session through violent disruption. Elena continued monitoring attack progressions while responding to the chairman's inquiry. Chairman Veltar, I'm secure and maintaining full communication capabilities. The attacks appear designed to eliminate integration advocacy while creating justification for military response against species involved in collaborative projects. This represents predictable resistance from factions that benefit from existing competitive structures. The observation was accurate, but understated the sophistication of what was occurring throughout Nexus Prime. Elena's intelligence systems showed that the assault teams weren't simply attempting assassination or sabotage. They were implementing complex operations designed to destabilize integration projects while appearing to be random terrorist actions by extremist groups. Dr. Vasquez, came another voice through her communication system. This is Ambassador Silthera. I'm currently secured in protected facilities, but my telepathic abilities are detecting coordination patterns that suggest extensive planning involving multiple species intelligence services. This isn't extremist action. This is coordinated response from established power structures. Elena appreciated the Kitharan diplomat's analysis, which confirmed her own assessment of the situation. Ambassador Silthera, your telepathic insights are valuable for understanding the psychological dynamics driving this resistance. Are you detecting specific motivations beyond general opposition to integration? Fear, Silthera replied immediately. Not fear of integration failure, but fear of integration success. Established authority structures recognize that collaborative approaches could make current power hierarchies obsolete. They're not fighting to prevent disaster. They're fighting to preserve existing advantages. The assessment aligned with Elena's understanding of galactic political psychology, but it also revealed opportunities that she had been developing contingency plans to address. Resistance from established powers could actually accelerate integration adoption if handled correctly. Elena activated emergency communication protocols that connected her directly to integration project sites throughout the galaxy. All integration project coordinators, this is Dr. Vasquez. Nexus Prime is experiencing coordinated attacks designed to disrupt council proceedings and destabilize collaborative development. Implement protection protocols and prepare for accelerated integration timeline. Responses came immediately from project sites in 4-star systems where collaborative development had been progressing ahead of schedule. The attacks on Nexus Prime provided exactly the catalyst needed to demonstrate integration methodology under crisis conditions. Dr. Vasquez, came the voice of Project Coordinator Chen from the Kepler 442 site. We're detecting increased military activity from non-participating civilizations near our operational areas. Appears to be coordinated with the Nexus Prime attacks. Should we initiate defensive measures? Elena smiled despite explosive sounds continuing to echo through the station corridors. Coordinator Chun, implement full defensive integration protocols. This is the practical test of whether collaborative frameworks can protect themselves against competitive military action. The mathematical models suggest integration should demonstrate clear advantages under these exact conditions. The defensive integration protocols that Elena referenced represented months of careful planning for exactly this scenario. Integration methodology wasn't just about resource development and territorial cooperation. It was about creating collaborative military capabilities that exceeded what individual civilizations could achieve through traditional defensive approaches. Within hours, the assault on Nexus Prime had transformed from an attack designed to prevent integration into a demonstration of why integration was necessary for galactic survival. The coordination required to defend against multi-species attacks exceeded what any individual civilization could provide, but collaborative defense networks proved capable of neutralizing threats that would have overwhelmed traditional security approaches. Chairman Veltar, Elena reported as the immediate assault phase concluded with attackers either captured or retreating. Defensive integration protocols have successfully protected both council facilities and integration project sites. However, the attack patterns reveal systematic vulnerability in current galactic security approaches that require collaborative solutions. The ancient chairman's response carried a mixture of relief and concern. Dr. Vasquez, preliminary assessments suggest that integration-based defensive measures were indeed more effective than traditional individual security approaches. However, the political implications of this crisis extend far beyond immediate security concerns. Elena accessed data showing the broader impact of the coordinated attacks, which had revealed alliance structures and coordination capabilities among galactic powers that most civilizations hadn't known existed. Chairman Veltar, the political implications actually support integration implementation rather than opposing it. The attacks demonstrate that competitive approaches to galactic security create vulnerabilities that collaborative approaches can address. Furthermore, she continued, the species that coordinated these attacks have inadvertently demonstrated that large-scale cooperation is not only possible, but highly effective when properly motivated. They've proven integration methodology while trying to prevent its adoption. The irony wasn't lost on delegates who had been monitoring the crisis developments. Species that had argued for millennia that large-scale cooperation was impossible had just demonstrated unprecedented coordination in attempting to prevent cooperation-based solutions to galactic challenges. Elena's communication system activated with an incoming message from Ambassador Thektar, whose volcanic features were visible through the video link despite obvious damage to his quarters from the recent attacks. Dr. Vasquez, Vorthan analysis of the assault patterns confirms your assessment regarding coordination sophistication. The attackers demonstrated integration capabilities superior to most traditional military alliances. Ambassador Thektar, Elena replied, your species' military expertise provides crucial insights into the defensive advantages of collaborative approaches. Are you prepared to consider that integration methodology offers security benefits that exceed competitive military strategies? The question struck at the heart of Vorthan civilization, which had built its galactic position on military superiority and territorial control through force projection. Admitting that collaborative approaches offered superior security would require fundamental reconsideration of strategic assumptions that had shaped their civilization for millennia. Dr. Vasquez, Thektar responded slowly. Vorthan military analysis indicates that the defensive integration protocols deployed during this crisis exceeded our projected capabilities for individual response to similar threats. However, collaborative military approaches require trust levels that may exceed what's achievable between species with historical territorial conflicts. Elena nodded respectfully. Ambassador Thektar, trust requirements for military collaboration do exceed current comfort levels for most civilizations. However, the attacks on integration projects demonstrate that competitive military approaches create systemic vulnerabilities that collaborative approaches can eliminate. She activated displays showing tactical analyses of the recent coordinated attacks, highlighting weaknesses in traditional defensive approaches that had been exploited by the multi-species assault teams. Individual security measures were insufficient to address coordinated multi-species threats, but collaborative defensive networks neutralized attacks that would have succeeded against any single civilization's protective capabilities. The mathematical reality, Elena continued, is that galactic security threats are evolving beyond what individual civilizations can address through competitive military approaches. Integration isn't just more efficient for resource development and territorial management. It's becoming necessary for survival against threats that exceed individual defensive capabilities. As Elena spoke, her data systems showed intelligence reports confirming that the coordinated attacks had been planned and executed by factions within multiple established civilizations, including some represented on the Council itself. The implications were staggering for galactic political stability and trust between Council members. Dr. Vasquez came a new voice through her communication system. This is Ambassador Uargok. Bruton Intelligence Services have completed preliminary analysis of the attack coordination patterns. Our findings indicate that established galactic powers collaborated more effectively in attempting to prevent integration than most civilizations have achieved in centuries of formal alliance structures. Elena appreciated the Bruton diplomat's candid assessment, which highlighted exactly the paradox she had been hoping the resistance would demonstrate. Ambassador Uargok, your analysis confirms that large-scale collaboration is not only possible, but highly effective when civilizations are properly motivated. The question now is whether galactic civilization chooses to channel collaborative capabilities toward constructive objectives or continues using them only for destructive purposes. Furthermore, Elena continued, The success of defensive integration protocols during this crisis provides practical proof that collaborative approaches offer advantages that justify the trust investments required for implementation. Species that experience integration benefits become naturally motivated to protect and expand collaborative frameworks. Elena's communication system indicated an incoming priority message from the integration project sites that had been targeted during the coordinated attacks. All 4 collaborative development locations were reporting not just successful defense against military assault, but accelerated development progress as participating species rallied to protect shared investments. All project coordinators are reporting similar phenomena, Elena announced to the delegates monitoring crisis communications. Military pressure against integration projects is actually accelerating collaborative development as participating species recognize the value of what they're protecting. Resistance to integration is proving to be its most effective catalyst. The observation carried profound implications for the council session scheduled to resume in less than 12 hours. What had been intended as a demonstration of integration vulnerability had transformed into proof of integration resilience and effectiveness under the most challenging possible conditions. Chairman Veltar's voice carried new respect when he next addressed Elena. Dr. Vasquez, you anticipated resistance to integration proposals and developed defensive protocols specifically for this scenario. Human strategic planning appears to exceed what most civilizations expected from newcomers to galactic politics. Elena smiled with satisfaction that came from months of careful preparation finally, demonstrating its value. Chairman Veltar, human strategic planning is based on integration methodology applied to political and military challenges rather than just resource development and territorial management. We analyze galactic civilization as a complete system and developed approaches that address multiple challenges simultaneously. The coordinated attacks represented predictable responses from competitive interests threatened by collaborative alternatives, she continued. However, successfully defending against such attacks demonstrates that integration methodology provides security, efficiency, and resilience advantages that make it superior to competitive approaches across all major civilizational challenges. As dawn approached on Nexus Prime Station, Elena reviewed data showing the full scope of the night's events. What had begun as assassination attempts and sabotage operations had transformed into the most compelling demonstration possible of why galactic civilization needed to evolve beyond competitive approaches that created systemic vulnerabilities. The species that had coordinated attacks against integration had inadvertently proven that large-scale collaboration was not only possible, but highly effective. The defensive integration protocols had demonstrated superior security capabilities compared to traditional individual approaches. The integration projects had shown resilience under military pressure while accelerating development progress. Most importantly, the crisis had revealed that galactic civilization already possessed the collaborative capabilities necessary for integration implementation. The challenge wasn't developing new cooperation abilities. The challenge was redirecting existing cooperation from destructive competition toward constructive collaboration. When the council reconvened, Elena would face delegates who had witnessed firsthand both the necessity of collaborative approaches for galactic security and the practical effectiveness of integration methodology under crisis conditions. The real question was no longer whether integration was theoretically possible or practically achievable. The real question was whether galactic civilization would choose conscious evolution toward collaborative frameworks or continue stumbling toward competitive destruction through unconscious resistance to necessary change. Elena prepared for the most important council session in galactic history, knowing that the night's events had transformed the entire context of civilization-level decision-making. The resistance had become the catalyst, and integration methodology had proven itself under the most demanding conditions possible. Now galactic civilization would choose its future with full knowledge of what both paths actually led to. The reconvened session of the Galactic Council began in an atmosphere unlike anything in the institution's millennia of existence. Representatives from 47 civilizations gathered in a chamber that still showed scorch marks from the previous night's coordinated attacks, while integration project sites throughout the galaxy reported accelerated collaborative development in response to military pressure that had been intended to destroy them. Elena stood once again at the central podium, but this time she faced delegates who had witnessed firsthand both the destructive potential of competitive coordination and the protective power of collaborative integration. The mathematical theories and practical demonstrations she had presented over the previous months had been tested under the most extreme conditions possible, and the results had transformed the entire context of galactic political decision-making. Chairman Veltar called the session to order, his ancient voice carrying new gravity as he addressed assembled representatives whose civilizations had just experienced the closest approach to large-scale conflict in centuries. The events of the past 18 hours have demonstrated capabilities and vulnerabilities that require immediate council attention. Dr. Vasquez, the floor recognizes the Terran Federation for closing statements regarding integration methodology proposals. Elena activated the chamber's display systems, which showed real-time data from integration project sites that had not only survived coordinated military assault, but had achieved breakthrough developments in collaborative technology that exceeded all previous projections. The contrast between destructive competitive coordination and constructive collaborative integration was stark and undeniable. Honorable delegates, Elena began, her voice carrying to every corner of the chamber with confidence earned through months of patient preparation and successful crisis response. The events of the past day have provided the most comprehensive possible test of integration methodology under extreme conditions. The results speak for themselves. The display showed detailed analyses of the defensive operations that had protected both council facilities and collaborative development projects from multi-species military assault. The coordination required for effective defense had exceeded what any individual civilization could provide, but collaborative networks had proved capable of neutralizing threats that would have overwhelmed traditional security approaches. Integration methodology has now been tested under optimal conditions during peaceful development and extreme conditions during coordinated military attack, Elena continued. In both scenarios, collaborative approaches produced measurably superior results compared to competitive alternatives. The question facing this council is no longer whether integration works. The question is whether galactic civilization chooses conscious evolution or unconscious destruction. She paused, allowing the weight of recent events to settle in the minds of beings who had spent the previous night witnessing both the potential for unprecedented cooperation and the reality of systemic vulnerabilities in existing competitive structures. However, Elena continued, before addressing that choice, I want to acknowledge something that became clear during the crisis. The civilizations that coordinated attacks against integration demonstrated collaborative capabilities that exceed most formal alliance structures in galactic history. They proved that large-scale cooperation is not only possible, but highly effective when properly motivated. The observation drew uncomfortable shifting among delegates as they recognized the paradox that Elena was highlighting. Species that had argued for millennia that extensive cooperation was impossible had just demonstrated unprecedented coordination in attempting to prevent cooperation-based solutions. Ambassador Silthara's serpentine form coiled in her seating area, scales shifting through colors that indicated deep mental activity as her telepathic abilities detected emotional undercurrents throughout the chamber. Dr. Vasquez, your point about demonstrated collaborative capabilities is valid, but it doesn't address the fundamental question of whether species can redirect competitive instincts toward constructive rather than destructive objectives. Elena turned toward the Kitharan delegate, her expression showing appreciation for the question that struck at the heart of galactic political psychology. Ambassador Silthara, competitive instincts don't require redirection when collaborative approaches provide superior results for achieving competitive objectives. The species that attacked integration projects were competing to protect their advantages, but they inadvertently demonstrated that collaboration achieves competitive goals more effectively than traditional competitive approaches. The display shifted to show game theory models and behavioral analyses that explained how collaborative frameworks could channel competitive drives toward innovation and excellence rather than territorial acquisition and resource hoarding. More importantly, Elena continued, The integration project sites that were targeted reported accelerated development progress as participating species rallied to protect shared investments. Military pressure against collaboration actually strengthened collaborative bonds and increased efficiency improvements beyond peaceful development rates. The mathematical reality, she explained as the display showed detailed performance data from the crisis period, is that integration methodology becomes stronger under pressure because collaborative approaches create shared stakes that increase motivation for all participants. Competitive approaches become weaker under pressure because individual interests eventually conflict with group objectives. Ambassador Thektar rose from his position among the Vorthan delegation, his volcanic features showing signs of internal struggle as he processed implications that challenged fundamental assumptions of his militaristic civilization. Dr. Vasquez, Vorthan analysis confirms your assessment regarding collaborative defensive effectiveness. However, implementing integration on galactic scales requires trust levels that may exceed what's politically achievable given historical territorial conflicts. Elena nodded respectfully toward the powerful Vorthan diplomat. Ambassador Thektar, political achievability changes when the alternatives become mathematically unacceptable. Trust requirements for integration seem daunting compared to current political comfort levels, but they become manageable compared to the certainty of civilizational destruction through continued competitive escalation. The display showed updated projections based on data collected during the recent crisis, including refined estimates for resource depletion timelines, territorial competition intensification, and probability calculations for large-scale galactic conflict. The mathematics were more stark than Elena's original presentations had suggested. Recent events have confirmed that galactic civilization possesses both the collaborative capabilities necessary for integration implementation and the destructive potential to eliminate itself through competitive escalation, Elena explained. The choice isn't between comfortable cooperation and challenging competition. The choice is between challenging cooperation and civilizational suicide. Chairman Veltar leaned forward in his ancient seat, studying the projections with attention that came from having witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations throughout galactic history. Dr. Vasquez, you're suggesting that recent events have eliminated middle ground options between integration adoption and competitive destruction? Elena's expression showed the serious determination of someone who had calculated possibilities that no civilization wanted to acknowledge. Chairman Veltar, middle ground options were eliminated by mathematical reality before recent events occurred. The crisis simply made visible what was already inevitable. Galactic civilization must evolve beyond competitive resource management or face destruction through conflicts that exceed any individual civilization's ability to survive or control. However, she continued, recent events also demonstrated that evolution toward collaborative frameworks is not only possible, but already partially achieved. The question isn't whether galactic civilization can cooperate on necessary scales. The question is whether it will choose to cooperate consciously for constructive purposes rather than unconsciously for destructive ones. Ambassador Uargok stood slowly from his position among the Brutin delegation, his massive frame commanding attention throughout the chamber, while his 6 eyes reflected deep consideration of implications that challenged everything his species had believed about galactic politics. Dr. Vasquez, Uargok rumbled. You present choices as mathematical inevitabilities rather than political decisions. However, civilizations have agency. We can choose approaches that mathematical models don't predict. What makes you certain that galactic civilization will follow mathematical projections rather than creating alternative possibilities? Elena had been waiting for this question throughout her months of observation and analysis because it struck at the fundamental difference between human and galactic approaches to strategic thinking. Ambassador Uargok, civilizations do have agency, but agency operates within constraints imposed by physical reality. Mathematical models don't predict what civilizations will choose. They calculate what becomes possible or impossible based on resource availability, population pressure, and territorial limitations. The display showed detailed resource depletion curves, population growth projections, and territorial competition analyses that demonstrated mathematical boundaries within which political decisions could operate. Agency allows choosing among available alternatives, but it cannot create alternatives that physical reality makes impossible. Current resource consumption patterns and population growth rates will exceed galactic carrying capacity within decades regardless of political decisions. The mathematical certainty, Elena continued, is that resource scarcity will force either collaborative efficiency improvements or competitive conflicts for access to diminishing resources. Agency determines which response galactic civilization chooses, but it cannot eliminate the necessity of choosing. Elena paused, looking around the chamber at representatives whose civilizations had shaped galactic politics for millennia, before asking the question that would determine galactic civilization's future. The real question facing this council is not whether integration is preferable to competition, or whether collaboration is more efficient than territorial expansion, or whether trust requirements for cooperation are achievable given historical conflicts. Her voice carried throughout the chamber with clarity that ensured every being present understood the magnitude of what she was asking. The real question is whether you're ready to admit that you already know what needs to happen, or whether you're going to continue pretending that obvious solutions are impossible because implementing them requires abandoning comfortable assumptions about how galactic civilization must function. The chamber fell into silence that felt different from any previous pause in council proceedings. This wasn't the quiet of beings processing new information or considering.